Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving into a story that seriously reads like a modern political thriller. I mean, it's got espionage, rebellions, dire warnings, the whole nine yards. But this isn't some new blockbuster. It's the ancient Book of Two Kings. And it's a powerful story about power, faith, and what it looks like when a nation goes through a slow-motion collapse.
The entire book is wrestling with this one central question that feels so incredibly relevant today. What actually causes a great nation to collapse? From the inside, this isn't just ancient history, not at all. It's more like a detailed case study of internal decay and its absolutely devastating consequences. At its heart, the book's main job is to document this final, really turbulent chapter for the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. It picks up right where the first book of Kings left off, and it takes us on a ride all the way to the bitter, bitter end, exile. So to really get a grip on this collapse, we first have to understand who the key players are, because right from the start of our story, the nation is already broken in two. So what we're actually following are two parallel and often rival stories. You've got the northern kingdom, Israel, home to some pretty notorious kings like Ahab. And then in the south, you have the kingdom of Judah, led by guys like Hezekiah and Josiah. And even though they're separate, their fates are deeply and, as we'll see, tragically connected. But here's the thing. The book makes a really powerful and consistent point about what the core problem was. The biggest threat wasn't some foreign army knocking at the door. It was decay from within. The text basically argues that by turning their backs on their own foundational laws and worshiping other gods, they weren't just changing their religion. They were tearing up the very contract that defined them as a nation and was supposed to guarantee their survival. Okay, but this slow decline didn't just happen in a vacuum. A whole new cast of characters shows up on the scene to challenge everything that's going on. And these are the prophets. Now, when we say prophet in this story, we're not talking about some kind of fortune teller. Think of them more like whistleblowers, right? They're these voices of accountability, sent to warn the kings and the people, hey, you are on a really dangerous path and you need to turn back now. And the story is really driven by these incredible figures. You've got the larger-than-life prophets Elijah and Elisha, who are out there performing miracles and confronting kings right to their faces. Then you have these reform-minded kings like Hezekiah and Josiah, who genuinely tried to reverse the decline. And you even get these fascinating characters like Naaman, a foreign general, whose story shows that these themes were reaching way beyond the kingdom's own borders. And to get a sense of just how bad things had gotten, think about this story with King Josiah. So during his reign, they find the Book of the Law. I mean, this is their foundational legal and spiritual text, and they find it in the temple almost like it had been just lost and forgotten. It's a completely shocking moment, right? It just shows the depth of the kingdom's spiritual amnesia. And it kicks off this brief but really dramatic period of reform. But here's the really tragic part of the story. For all the stark warnings from prophets like Elijah, and for all the passionate reforms from kings like Josiah, it just wasn't enough. These were just temporary fixes. The overall trend for both kingdoms just kept spiraling downward. For the most part, the warnings just went ignored. And all of this is building and building to the book's dramatic and violent climax, the complete and total collapse of both kingdoms. And right here, we see the ultimate price being paid. First, in 722 BC, the northern kingdom of Israel is just completely wiped out by the ruthless Assyrian Empire. Its people are scattered everywhere. The southern kingdom, Judah, it manages to hang on, but for how long? Well, after more than a century of its own decline, it meets the exact same fate in 586 BC. The Babylonian Empire rolls in, destroys Jerusalem, burns the temple to the ground, and hauls its people off into exile. It's over. The end has arrived. So this is a really crucial point to understand. The book itself doesn't frame this destruction as some random tragedy or even just a military defeat. Instead, it argues that this was the direct and, in its view, just consequence for centuries of the nation turning its back on its own foundational laws. And that brings us to the book's conclusion, which is this really powerful mix of, well, final judgment, but also a very subtle, almost unexpected flicker of hope. So the overwhelming message at the end is absolutely one of judgment. The exile is shown to be the fulfillment of every warning the prophets had ever delivered. And yet, the book doesn't end with Jerusalem in flames. The very last few verses describe the release of Jehoiachin, a descendant of King David, from a Babylonian prison. I mean, it's a small, quiet moment, but it's loaded with meaning. It suggests that the royal line isn't completely, totally gone. And that leaves us with the book's final, pretty provocative question. Is the Book of Two Kings just a story of total destruction and failure? Or is that tiny glimmer of hope, right at the very, very end, a hint that this ending isn't really an ending at all, but maybe, just maybe, the prelude to a new beginning?